in a nutshell. Have you got a couple of days?
Yeah.
How did I get into business? Lenny's evolved. I had an interest in jazz. I grew up in the 30s and 40s. I secured a position with a record distributorship right after the war. And a friend of mine was a musician who worked at a club. I was working as a waiter. I went to work for him, selling independent records. And then I went to work for this guy, a friend of mine who had a club, as a waiter. And he thought that I had a feeling for the business. I immediately liked the idea of the business because the markup was so good in booze. And it just evolved. He found that this built a story-and-a-half location on Route 1. We rented it. We opened it as a roadhouse. I filled the jukebox with jazz records. It became known on the Turnpike as a unique location where one could hear jazz without paying any music charge. You could hear the best available jazz on a jukebox. And it went over because at that time Symphony Sid was working in Boston at WBMS, and he showed up one night and he thought the club had potential as a jazz club because it was small, it was compact, and it had somebody who was interested in the music. Not like the Village Vanguard, which went for 75, 80. I'm not knocking him. Max Gordon did a hell of a job, and Eleanor is his heir is there now. But we didn't start out as anything but a roadhouse.
When was that? What year?
1951. And it evolved. One thing just kept happening. Telescoped, First we hired local musicians. Then we hired local jazz musicians. Then we hired, as we got a response, we hired musicians from Boston, jazz musicians. And we realized Berkeley was a hotbed for talent. And we started becoming a place where the Jimmy Moshers and the Hal Galpers and the Alan Dawsons and had a place to play. And then all of a sudden we were doing the 4 nights on a tour of Roy Eldridge, which was produced by Fred Taylor and John Sudukas, a couple of people who had worked for George Wein and had a feel for what's going on. And of course Fred Taylor, as you know, still is involved, bless him. And that was a real tip-off. But before that, one of the locals, Joe Bucci, an organ player, really showed us that if you had a gimmick and you had a following, you could do some volume business. And it all boils down to this.
What was your gimmick?
Joe Bucci. Nobody had a jazz organ on the Turnpike. There are in trios, quartets, quintets, and bands, and Bucci had it all wrapped up in one instrument. And he was a hard-working guy, and he auditioned him at his home. I heard him play some things from Gypsy, and with the full, thrust of that instrument, I envisioned it in the club, and we got it going between his following and what we developed at the club. We got some people starting to arrive, and then when we attached the Roy Eldridge experience, the first big name on the Turnpike, with a great rhythm section of Ray Santisi, Alan Dawson, and John Neves, we were starting to show some spark. And before you know it, we were hiring Sonny Stitt and Zoot Sims and Coleman Hawkins. Of course, my knowledge of these guys and who was available and who were, Pepper Adams, people like that, helped a little bit.